The Legend of Ren Zu by Ren, Part 3.1, extracted from Chapter 58. Ever since Ren Zu was able to get their names and subdued the Rules Gu and Regulation Gu, his first order was for them to capture a Longevity Gu. Rules Gu and Regulation Gu, one round and other square, worked together and could capture all the Gu in the world. A Longevity Gu was nothing difficult. Ren Zu used the Longevity Gu and got back his youth, becoming 20 years old again. But now the Rules Gu said, "Human, although you subdued us, every time you command us, it will add a rule and regulation." Regulation Gu continued, "We can catch the Longevity Gu for you. This is the first order. Our new rule and regulation is, we will not repeatedly catch the same Gu for you." That means, if Ren Zu wanted to catch a Longevity Gu again, the two Rules Gu and Regulation Gu would not help. Ren Zu nodded, having no choice but to accept. He gave his second command. "Then, other than the Longevity Gu, please capture all the other 10,000 Gu in the world for me." Rules Gu and Regulation Gu got this command, and Rules Gu turned into a giant circle, encompassing the universe. Regulation Gu turned into a giant square, covering the large world. One square and one round formed a giant net together, enveloping the entire world. When they shrunk again and returned to Ren Zu, all the Gu in the world, other than Longevity Gu, were captured. Ren Zu was overjoyed. With this, all the Gu belonged to him. From now on, he was the ruler of the world. But once he opened the net, with a swoosh, a large number of worms flew outside, and the Gu that Rules Gu and Regulation Gu worked hard to catch, all escaped fervently. When Ren Zu closed the net, only 5 Gu were left. "Why is this?" Ren Zu was astonished. Rules Gu and Regulation Gu answered him, "Human, the world has over 10,000 Gu with all sorts of abilities. You have no strength or knowledge. How can you subdue them? We can only capture Gu for you. To subdue them, you have to rely on yourself to get them to work for you." Next they added, "This is your second order, so we'll add a second rule and regulation. From now on, we can only catch one Gu for you at a time." Ren Zu could only nod and carefully open the net, only showing a small gap. The remaining 5 Gu contained the Strength Gu and Wisdom Gu. Seeing this, Ren Zu was overjoyed. He said to Strength Gu, "Strength Gu, you left me back then. Do you have any regrets? If you succumb to me now, I will return you your freedom." Strength Gu said, "Human, you are wrong. I didn't leave, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to stay. You want to subdue me, but that's impossible. I only succumb to those stronger than me, but you are out of the question. However, we can deal again. Give me your youth, and I will temporarily obey you." Ren Zu was reluctant upon hearing this. He had just gotten back his youth. Was he about to lose it again? But he desired strength. He knew that with strength, he would get stronger and life would get easier. Moreover, with strength, he could subdue more Gu. Thus, Ren Zu accepted and formed a second deal with it. Ren Zu became middle-aged at once, and the Strength Gu flew out of the web and landed on Ren Zu's shoulder. Ren Zu had strength and was full of confidence. He said to Wisdom Gu, "Wisdom Gu, you left me back then. Do you have any regrets? If you succumb to me now, I will return you your freedom." Wisdom Gu said, "Human, you are wrong. I did not leave, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to stay. You want to subdue me, but that's impossible. I only succumb to those smarter than me, yet you are not smarter than me. But we can deal again. Give me your middle age, and I will temporarily obey you." Ren Zu, upon hearing this, refused to do the same deal again. He treasured his life more, and he also knew that once he sold his middle age, he would be left with old age. Before long, the Strength Gu and Wisdom Gu would leave him again, just like last time. Ren Zu refused to deal, but did not want to let go of the Wisdom Gu. Wisdom Gu was anxious, reluctantly giving in. "All right, human, you win. I lost to you this time. As long as you tell me what method you used to capture me, I will admit defeat and not take anything from you, being at your disposal." Upon hearing this, Ren Zu was overjoyed, and before the rules Gu and regulation Gu could stop him, he said, "I used the rules Gu and regulation Gu to capture you." Wisdom Gu laughed upon hearing. "I remembered it. So these Gu are called rules Gu and regulation Gu. Haha, now that I know your names, you can no longer capture me." Saying so, it turned into a flash of light and flew away, vanishing into thin air. Rules Gu and regulation. Gu begin to complain. "Human, we told you long ago that our names should be known by you alone, and not others. Otherwise, we would be used by others. Look what happened. Now that Wisdom Gu knows our names, it spells trouble." Only then did Ren Zu realize that he was tricked by Wisdom Gu. He was anguished, for he knew he lost the only chance he had of capturing the Wisdom Gu using rules Gu and regulation Gu.